want to thank Doug Chapman for accompanying the youth choir. Doug, over the years, has been a very important part of our music ministry in many different fashions and many different ways, and we appreciate Doug for all he's done for the last 15 to 20 years in our congregation. Doug. You know, normally any variation, this is my opinion, of a Beatles song turns out to be unsuccessful. A new way to play an old song doesn't normally, at least I think, work out in this instance. In my less than professional estimation, nothing comes close to attempting to match the original when there's a Beatles song involved. But there are some, except for Doug when he tries to sing it. But there are some songs that turn out to be better than the original, sung with the same spirit but with different instruments and different voices. You may have songs in mind that you feel turned out to be better than the original, and you may hear songs that make you cringe when you listen to another artist attempt to replicate the original. Well, of course, in life we can take that same expression, new ways to play an old song, including the world of sports, where more specifically the game of football, which to us is the old familiar song of simply trying to get the ball across at the goal line or kicking the ball between the uprights, no matter how a team accomplishes these tasks. But we have seen how the game has evolved with offensive schemes so complex that it's beyond comprehension how a quarterback can keep everything straight. One almost needs a PhD in organizational management. The game continually reinvents itself, but the fundamentals never go away, we know. Blocking and tackling and catching and passing and running. And we know that if you don't practice the fundamentals of anything and get good at them, it doesn't make any difference how many offensive and defensive formations you have. You still have to be good at the basics. The basics of the Christian faith 500 years ago were on life support. The old song of love and mercy and forgiveness and generosity, staples of the Christian faith, were not even being played anymore. And the only way to resurrect them was to rebel against the institutional church, which Calvin and Knox and Luther and many others did. In a different way, the reformers took the then 1,500-year-old message of Christ and reintroduced it to the many who had ignored it for convenience reasons of power and control, and then introduced this same message to the many who had never heard about it in the first place, the masses of peasants and many others who were easily manipulated and managed by the cynical and the indifferent. And so the likes of Calvin from Switzerland and Knox from Scotland and Luther from Germany, Presbyterians continue to embrace the revolutionary character of the reformers who insisted on putting the Bible into people's hands, which would be facilitated by the creation of the printing press, and reduce the authoritarian structure of the existing church, which had become abusive of its power and greatly unsympathetic to its parishioners, many of whom were illiterate and vulnerable. The Reformation, with its beginnings in Germany and Switzerland, spread rapidly throughout Europe, including Scotland, and became one of the most pivotal points in history in regard to the empowerment of the laity and the spread of democracy through Western civilization. Our bagpipes played by Ryan today are emblematic of the rebellious character of the Reformation and the rebellious character of the Scots. Now, the Song of Reformation 500 years ago wasn't necessarily a new way to play an old song, because the new way was alive and well when Christianity first started out 2,000 years ago, and the Bible was put into its final form several hundred years after that. But like what happens to a lot of movements and a lot of ideas and a lot of organizations, the further they become removed from the ideal in its purest form, the more they devolve from its original intent. And Christianity and the church were no exceptions. Even throughout the Bible, those in authority, as we heard this morning, read by Jan, the Hebrew king Ahab and his wife Queen Jezebel, and their contentious relationship with the prophet Elijah, we heard about this morning, abandoned the decent and just principles of Israel's kingdom in favor of expediency and the abdication of belief in God in favor of belief in false idols. Our passages today for 1 Kings don't allude to the reformation of the church, but they do allude to the reset of an individual's attitude, which was reflective of the values to be embraced by any member of the Hebrew family. In this case, the prophet Elijah, a complicated man with a complicated task of walking a tightrope between his own faith and threats to his own life from a corrupt royal family, has to deal with an empire that has drifted so far away from the Hebrew concept of justice and fair play, so much that it is no longer recognizable to Elijah or to God. At one point in Elijah's desperation, he comes across an unnamed widow who he provides food for along with her son. And the son becomes sick and he dies, and Elijah subsequently raises him from the dead, even after the widow castigates him for bringing death and destruction to her home. Elijah's treatment of the poor widow and his willingness to reach out to her is symptomatic of God's larger concern of taking care of those on the margins of life. And the prophets, the Old Testament prophets, repeated calls to the nation of Israel to look out for the poor, to look out for the mistreated, and to look out for the neglected. Reform your hearts, regenerate your souls, renew your minds. Isn't that a lesson for all of us, no matter where we are in life? Reform, regenerate, renew, push the reset button, and go back to the values that you know to be true and you know to be trusted. You know, there's going to be a tendency and temptation to drift away from the ideals that originally formed yours and my way of thinking. Just as there was a temptation and tendency of the church hundreds of years ago to abandon its core foundation, and that was in Jesus Christ. As the old hymn goes, the church's one foundation is Jesus Christ our Lord. She is his new creation by water and the word. But that was no longer the case in the 16th century. The church had reduced itself to corruption and cronyism. And so we owe a great deal of gratitude for what the reformers did to remind and to reinstitute the values that Christ laid out 2,000 years ago. Now, going in a little different direction in this election season, wouldn't it be great if future generations of Americans felt a deep sense of gratitude to us because we stepped up and we reminded ourselves and others of the Judeo-Christian values that built our nation into what it is today? We aren't necessarily in need of reformation, but we are in need of renewal. Deep down inside, I believe that we understand and we appreciate the common values that Americans share. We just have to kick ourselves so often to remind ourselves that we really are more unified than we think. In this season of elections, we have repeatedly heard issues that always seem to be at the center of debates about which direction our nation should head. We hear about new ways and we hear about new ideas to address old problems. But when you get right down to it, there really isn't that much that separates us when it comes to the old song of liberty and opportunity, the old basics upon which I believe a great majority of Americans believe. You know, if you put a widely diverse group of Americans into one room and you ask them several fundamental questions, beginning with, do you believe that one should work hard, give it his or her best? Do you believe in accountability and responsibility? Do you believe in helping others in need? Do you believe in the importance of being a good citizen? Do you believe in sharing your resources? Do you believe in treating others fairly and respectfully? Do you believe in not excluding others from the ability to pursue opportunity? Do you believe in staying connected to your family and friends? Do you believe in the importance of faith? Maybe it's just wishful thinking on my part, but I feel 90 to 100% of the people in that room would answer yes to every single one of those questions. Within my own immediate family and within my extended family, there are a lot of divergent viewpoints when it comes to particular issues. But if you put all of them in the same living room and you ask them all those questions, I would say that 100% of them would answer yes to each of those questions. So what's the problem? Everybody seems to like the old song. Those virtues have been around forever and still constitute the golden thread that holds our nation together. But maybe we've made it a little too complicated. Maybe we've added too many parts to the old song that have made us forget how really sweet the old song is. Maybe we've concentrated too much on the details and we've lost sight of the original message. Maybe we're thinking too much about what's in it for me and not what's in it for everybody else. Like what President Kennedy said way back in 1960, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. Maybe we need to recapture that spirit, that energy, similar to what the reformers were saying about the Christian faith. You know, interesting enough for me at least, I was thinking about this theme as it relates to the Chicago Cubs in the World Series. You may be asking yourself now, where's Cam going with this one? Well, hear me out for just a minute. Now, I'm not a big Chicago Cub fan, but a close friend of mine sent me a Chicago Cub t-shirt not too long ago and told me I should be wearing it during the series. So I have put it on a couple of times in respect for him, out of respect for him. I even got Jennifer to wear it yesterday. Regardless of the fact that the Cubs haven't played in the World Series in 71 years, most baseball fans would have to probably admit that there's a romanticism about the team, especially the team's field, that draws fans to the sport in general, in baseball. Similar to the movie, remember Field of Dreams, where the young Iowa farmer and his family built the field in the middle of an Iowa cornfield. When I was in seminary in the Chicago area, I normally go to a couple Cubs games every summer. So if you've been to a Cubs game in Wrigley Field on the north side of Chicago, it's a field you always remember, to which you always want to return, because it has baseball written all over it. The field transcends the players themselves. Its ivy-covered walls, its manually operated scoreboard, its location right in the middle of a neighborhood, its tradition of singing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" in seventh inning stretch, a place where they play baseball more in the day than they play at night. Its unusual wind patterns off of Lake Michigan, both stopping or creating home runs. All these things and many more remind us of the purity of the game. When the reformers came along 500 years ago, what did they want to do? Simply to restore the purity of the faith. Love your neighbor as you would love yourself. It's more blessed for you to give than it is to receive. I was hungry and you gave me food. I had no clothes and you clothed me. I was a stranger and you made me feel welcome. I was sick and you came to see me. I was in need and you reached out to me. How much simpler and how much beautiful can it get?